Just
There we go.
did it. Um, okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and start with introductions. So my name is Jessica Alexander. I'm one of the vice chairs of the Dallas uh, Bar Association's mock trial committee, and we're kind of the committee in charge of the whole state competition for high school mock trial. With me today are Jamie Olin, another vice chair, Kevin Anders, who's got his camera turned off, who is another vice chair, and then our very able committee member, Stacy McNulty, who is actually not even in the state of Texas, but she loves you
What?
guys so much. That's why she's here.
Thank you.
So if you've attended in past years, what I'm about to go through is going to be very repetitive for you, very candidly. But we try to be aware of not everybody here has the same level of knowledge. It's been a year since you did mock trial. Maybe you've forgotten all the rules, forgotten all the things. So we're just going to kind of go through it very quickly. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. You can also say them out loud if you want to. Our experiences people don't always want to do that. But if you want to throw it into the chat, one of my co-hosts can either say the question and answer it, or if they don't know the answer, then I can answer it. We'll go, we'll figure that out as we go along. But please ask your questions as we go along, because we don't want anybody to leave here not really sure what's going on. That's kind of against the goal of today. So, um, one of the things we like to do is to have people just shout out where you're from in the chat so we can see who all is with us, what area of the state you're from. I know last year there were a lot of people from, I want to say McAllen. Was that where we got a lot of shout outs from last year, Jamie?
I think so.
So, or George West High School. Where's George West High School at? Melanie, Mullane, sorry. Corpus and San Antonio. Okay, okay. Got Frisco CTE, El Paso, Lubbock, Jamie from Dallas. America's representing El Paso, El Paso, Lubbock. Awesome. Houston. Awesome. Okay, so one of the reasons we love doing this competition, we've got a couple people who snuck in from the Dallas area, which is totally fine. I'm in Dallas and I'm here at my house presenting to you guys instead of at the courthouse. Um, but we love doing this because there are people from all over the state. Like in past years before, really before COVID, we weren't really presenting to places like El Paso and McAllen or Houston. And so that's one of the reasons we love and are really committed to this virtual clinic. Jamie and I are like, we're going to do it forever as long as we're alive, basically, is what we've told them. Um, and so we're really excited about that because otherwise we wouldn't be able to really outreach to the El Paso, Lubbock, McAllen, Houston, San Antonio, Georgia West High School, which is between Corpus and San Antonio. That feels like a pretty, I don't know where it feels like you're just in the middle of nowhere is what you're telling me. Um, so we weren't able to reach you guys in past years, and so we're super excited that you're here and that we get to share some of our wisdom. Hopefully it's helpful to you. If it's not, maybe don't tell us and don't hurt our feelings. But I think it'll be very helpful. I think everybody's going to get something out of it. And also, we have a special guest this year, Barbara Armstrong, who's going to be leading a breakout room for courtroom artists. So if there's any of you hanging out, waiting, you'll get to go into a breakout room with her in just a little bit so she can share some of her wisdom with you guys on art. So let's keep rolling. All right. One of the things I like to do is kind of go through the rules of like the main high points for you guys, just as a reminder and refresher. Again, team composition. Um, you can have between 6 and 10 people. That includes your timekeeper. Any of the 6 members can compete. You don't have to name only 6. It's not like you have to have 6 and then 3 backups. As long as they're on your like main team roster, they can be listed for each individual round. Um, I'm like already losing track of what I'm talking about. Oh, it's because I wasn't actually on the page with the information. Um, Each team is going to get a team roster. They're fillable PDFs. Please make every effort to make them as clear as possible. I can't tell you how many times as a presiding judge, and Jamie, Kevin, Stacy can all chime in on this as well. If I don't know who you are, it's a real bummer because I want to be able to give people best advocate, best witness awards when I'm able to. And if I can't figure out your name or I'm not sure who was playing each witness, it makes it really difficult to do that. So rosters are super important, making sure we're filling them out for each round correctly. Um, Also, sometimes the judges will ask you to introduce yourself in pretrial. I like to do that. Not every judge does, but as long as your roster is correct, that's ultimately like what the goal is. So, as far as team duties, each of the three attorneys will conduct, basically, you're going to have three attorneys and three witnesses for each of your rounds. Each attorney will conduct one direct and one cross. One attorney gives an opening statement and a different attorney gives a closing statement. The same attorney cannot do opening and close. If you attempt to do that, you're going to get no points for your closing argument. Um, Opening statements must be given by both teams at the start of a trial. So if you've seen like a real life trial where someone, you know, where the defense will wait and give their opening statement at the opening of their case, we don't do that in mock trial. At the very beginning, both teams give their opening statement. Um, Whatever attorney is assigned to a witness is the only attorney who can make objections to that witness as well. So if somebody else starts making objections, that can also just lead to loss of points. Um, and then as far as the witnesses go, each side has three witnesses. A different person has to portray each witness. You can't have one person be all three witnesses. Even if you have somebody who's like an Academy Award winning actor, they don't get to be all three witnesses. You have to have three individual people do it. Okay. And like I said, just throw your questions in chat. And then if we need to kind of interject, one of my co-hosts will speak up and let us do this. But a lot of this should be a refresher. And again, these are straight from the rules. This is not me making up things to tell you. These are all in the mock trial rules. Okay. For timekeepers, um, basically, we have been giving like a cheat sheet for timekeepers in past years. I believe that's on the website. Reach out to Melissa if you don't see it or if you have any questions. The only real change we've made this year is just to clarify what we have been doing in practice the last few years, which is using stopwatches and not cell phones. But we are aware of the fact that there's always accessibility or disability issues surrounding use of devices. So if you're a team that has that concern, please reach out to your regional coordinators. Please reach out to Melissa and discuss that if you feel like you need to use an alternate device for timekeeping purposes. Okay, but otherwise, this is kind of how we've been running it, is that everyone should be using a stopwatch. So we just kind of put that actually in writing this year. Um, Last year, they introduced new time cards. Jamie, I don't know if you remember how like awful they were. They were incredibly confusing. That's because the national competition did that. They were terrible. We introduced it in ours. You have the choice as to which you want to use. Our preference is to use our old ones that are still available to you. But if you just really want to use the ones for national, you absolutely can. I find that they're just a little busy, and the timers kind of count backwards instead of counting down. I think they counted up like you've used 14 minutes instead of saying you have 1 minute left. Um, but it's totally your choice. You can use whichever. We just do recommend that you have them physically printed. Most people have like really pretty laminated versions of them so that you can kind of hold them up as you go along. But again, there should be a timekeeper option. I will say the one thing is if you can't find a timekeeper to your team, um, that means you automatically have to use the other side's time. You're not allowed to, like, you're stuck with whatever time they keep if you don't have your own. So it's really important to try to get a timekeeper if you can. They don't have to speak, they don't have to do any public speaking. There's no memorizing of lines. All they have to do is kind of keep the stopwatches correctly and hold up the signs. Okay, so some of our basic rules. Um, Our problem has three witnesses per side. They all have different names where we try to let them be kind of gender neutral. Um, so there's no rules about what gender has to play any specific witness. Um, all three witnesses per side must be called. You can't call somebody from the other side. You can't call one of your own witnesses as a hostile witness. They're all supposed to be witnesses for your case. We have really strict time limits, but you're not required to use the entire time. If you have time left over, that's fine. But if you have time remaining for one segment, it doesn't carry over to other segments. So if you, for instance, only use 4 of your 5 minutes in opening statement, you don't get an extra minute anywhere else. It just kind of goes away. And then as far as crossing, or I'm sorry, redirecting and recross, there's going to be one redirect and one recross, and then nothing else after that. We don't keep going forever. Okay. This is kind of like one of the main issues that we sometimes have had in the past is independent research. You're absolutely allowed to do independent research to better understand information in the case, to better understand especially the rules of evidence or how to get exhibits in or anything like that. There's all sorts of amazing resources online for that. What you cannot do is use that in your trial in terms of like trying to enter that as evidence. Okay, so if you researched like, music, like let's say the case had to do with songwriting. So you did a deep dive on your own about songwriting, the process, music, lyrics, all of that. Amazing. But what you can't do is have a witness testify to all of that if it's not in their fact statement. So the witnesses are bound by their fact statements. They can't testify outside of those things. And then most importantly, if there's anything about your research that tells you that facts in the case are wrong, too bad. We're stuck with the really wrong facts of the case, is what I would say. And I'll just say I didn't write the case this year. I don't even know what it's about, candidly. So if I give you guys an example and you're like, "Ooh, she's talking about our case this year," it is a coincidence. I know it's a criminal case. That is really all I can tell you about the cases here. Jamie's nodding her head. I think Jamie agrees. We know it's a criminal case. I couldn't tell you anything beyond the fact that it's a criminal case. But the example is like if in the materials someone testifies, well, the sky was pink, and we know scientifically the sky can never be pink. You can't have a witness testify to dispute that unless the witness is like, no, I saw the sky and it was orange, right? The witness could testify to that, but they can't get into the science behind it and why it's wrong because the internet says so. Okay. Trial communication, the main thing here is that the only people who are really allowed to talk to each other are the attorneys and then the witnesses. The six of you can talk to each other. Nobody else can talk to you. The timekeeper can't communicate with you. Your coaches can't communicate with you. Other members of your team, even if they are on the roster, cannot communicate with you. So only the six participating members in each trial can communicate. I will say, um, you're not as sneaky as you think you are. Sitting on the judge's bench, we see a lot more than you think we do. We notice a lot of those things. Also, the opposing team is going to be real quick to snitch on you if they see it happening. So, when there's rules violations like that, people will tell because it's just not allowed. No signaling, nobody nodding in the back row trying to help a witness figure out what they're supposed to do. Like, none of that's allowed. To be really clear, attorneys can obviously pass notes to each other. Witnesses can obviously lean forward and talk to the attorneys. Depending on the setup of your courtroom, you may or may not be able to really talk to each other that easily. Um, that's fine. The people who are not actively competing in a round cannot communicate with you. Okay. Objections. I'm just highlighting this to say that there is a rule in the rules that tells you what some objections are. This is not an exhaustive list. You can make any objection consistent with the rules of evidence for the competition. Okay, that is why I highlight this rule is because in past people have said, well, it's not listed in the rule. Can I make this objection? The answer is yes, as long as it's consistent with our rules of evidence. Um, I know in our beginner breakout, we're going to explain what objections are and kind of talk about them. I think you'll probably practice that more in an intermediate advanced for those of you who have participated in past years. So there might be some practice for that. But I just want to highlight that 4.19 talks about objections. It has some of them there. That is not the entire list. So don't look at 4.19 and be like, oh my gosh, this is all I can object to. Um, I know also in our beginner, we're going to kind of give a brief overview on how to introduce exhibits, but 4.20 has kind of a good breakdown on how to do that as well. Um, so really, I will say, when in doubt, go read the rules first and then go read the rules of evidence. There's more in there than you realize that might help you. And finally, the last rule I want to highlight for everybody is in a criminal case, no witness may confess to the crime. That is very important for this year. That's a major, pretty egregious rule violation. I'm not really sure what will we do to handle it, but I'm gonna imagine that it would be really bad for the team that did it, um, because it would just really mess up the entire case if somebody confessed to the crime. So please make sure that you adhere to this, that there's no part of your strategy that revolves around a witness confessing to a crime. Okay. Now we understand some of the witness statements may make it sound like somebody did something or another, and that's one thing, but no one can sit on the stand. Is it a murder case? I don't even know. Kevin, is it a murder case?
Good question.
Nobody does. I
It's
have no
been a
idea.
minute.
Somebody might tell me what kind of case it is. I think it's a murder case. At the time I was involved, which was for like 3 minutes at the very beginning, they were talking about doing a murder case. So, like, let's say it's a murder case, no witness can take the stand and say, I murdered John Doe. It was my fault. I did it. Like, no
And
witness can
and
do that.
and Jessica, we have people in the chat confirming that yes, it is actually is a murder case.
Excellent. Love it. Um, okay, yeah, it's a murder case. Thanks. I was like, I think it's a murder. Yeah, see, this is how out of touch I am with the case. So if I give you an example and you're like, she's talking about the case, I'm obviously not. I'm just going to keep giving you that disclaimer because I have no idea. Okay. One of the questions that always comes up every single year is dress code, what we're allowed to wear, what we're not allowed to wear, most specifically around our female presenting, female identifying students. Um, the dress code is basically that you need to be presentable, right? As long as you're not wearing something super embarrassing. Really, the only rules we specifically have is you cannot wear anything that identifies your school, because you're supposed to be anonymous to us. So you can't wear a t-shirt that says Frisco CTE, for example. Um, no matter how proud you are of your school's spirit, that's kind of the one rule. And the second rule is no costumes. If you are, for instance, portraying somebody who is a circus clown, you can't dress up as a circus clown for the court proceedings.
One thing I'll add here, and I think I add this every year about dress code, is if you want to wear heels, that's fine. Make sure you wear shoes that you can walk in and that you're not breaking in for the first time on trial day because it's just horrible. You don't want to be thinking about your blisters and your sore feet the entire time that you are going to be presenting at a mock trial. So that's my one recommendation is if you're wearing heels, make sure they're comfortable.
Yes, thank you, Jamie. I think most female attorneys who have tried to wear heels have made that mistake at some point in their career where you wear them for the first time and you're like, oh, no, this was a bad idea. Just shoes in general, like wearing a brand new pair of shoes on trial day, it's just like always a mistake. Um, but so specifically for our female students, you are absolutely welcome to wear pants. You're not required to wear a skirt or a dress. If you choose to wear a skirt or a dress, you're no expectation, no requirement that you wear pantyhose. Okay. Um, I don't wear pantyhose to court. If somebody told me I had to, I would look at them like they were absolutely crazy. Um, and so I have some pictures from a couple years ago from state tournaments, so you can just see a variety of the way people dress. Some teams have like a little bit of coordination, like these guys all had matching ties, which is very beautiful. Um, some teams just dress differently. There's really no right or wrong way to do it as long as you look presentable, as long as your mom wouldn't be embarrassed for you to go out in public that way, I think is kind of what we would say. Um, some people wear jackets, some people don't wear jackets. Um, so trial etiquette, um, you know, you would ultimately, we want you to treat the presiding judge as if it was a real judge, as if it was really somebody who could throw you in jail if you did the wrong thing. Now, obviously, we don't have the power to throw you in jail. I don't want you to be terrified. But when we talk about, general professionalism, that's what we're expecting. I wouldn't say you wouldn't yell at a real judge because people do that, but they get in trouble if they do that. And so I need you to approach it as if you will really get in trouble if you start screaming at the presiding judge. Um, I've never actually had that happen. I don't know, Jamie, have you ever had that happen? No. Generally, you guys behave very well, but we just kind of, some people are just really nervous. And so that's why we kind of go through this, is because we don't want you to feel nervous. All you got to do is just be on your best behavior and you're probably going to be fine. Ultimately, the judge's rulings go. Like, you're not going to be able to keep arguing with them forever. So you kind of have to move on at some point, but you're not judged on if your objections are sustained or overruled. That's not how we score you. We generally are scoring you based on how well you make the objection, the quality of the objection. Was it a good objection to make, or did you just kind of make it up as you went along? Or if the other side objected, did you respond to it really well? Did you know the exception to hearsay, for example? Did you give us a good reason why it wasn't a speculative question? I may sometimes sustain an objection just to see how you react, or because I kind of just want to move past a topic that you're stuck on. Um, Sometimes as presiding judges, we're not always ruling on objections based on like the right objection. We're doing it based on like just to see how people respond or to kind of move on or to see, you know, how are you going to handle it if I sustain this objection, Um, Witnesses, please remember that when an objection is being made, that's your time to stop talking. Um, and so, in a minute, I'm going to show you guys a clip, a video that we did from state competition a couple years ago. We kind of ran out of time. None of us had time to do a updated one this year for last year's competition. So if you were here last year at clinic, you've seen this. I'm sorry, it's the same video. It's available in full on the internet as well. And so I also want to highlight, and I'm going to drop a link in chat for you guys. Um, a number of our judges, including Jamie and Stacy, were on a panel and did a judges panel. And there's nope, I just sent that to one person instead of everybody. Okay, there we go. Um, and I was having trouble pulling it up on the internet this morning, so I apologize. It keeps telling me my internet's not stable, so I'm trying not to stream things to you guys. But they did basically a roundtable discussion where they discussed like things they like to see, things they don't like to see, advice for beginners, all sorts of other things. Jamie, do you want to give anything? Do you remember doing it? Hopefully you do. Um,
Yeah, it was just, I think it was about 10 or 12 judges, people who are very experienced being presiding judges in mock trial. And we had someone asking us questions, and we were each answering based on our own experiences and preferences. One of the big takeaways, whether you're a beginner or intermediate advanced in this, is that every presiding judge is different. And so you might get one judge that says, I love this. And then the next judge says, I hate that. And so, what we're telling you today are guidelines and some of the preferences that each of us has. But you, as a team and with your coach, need to figure out what's best for your team because there are some commonalities among judges about what we like and don't like, but there's a lot of differences too. So, I just wanted to highlight that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Jamie. I think it's a very interesting discussion that's on there. Also, all of our previous virtual clinics are on there as well. So if you just want to watch kind of us do the same, very similar thing year after year, you're welcome to do that. You'll see that we just repeat ourselves a lot. But it's because the advice we're giving you is what we believe is the best advice. And, if things change, we'll change our advice to you guys. But I highly recommend watching that video. I think it's very helpful to know expectations and to have an understanding. I think it's probably a little bit more helpful for the intermediate advanced students who know what they're doing a little bit to hear that critique and feedback. But the judges on that panel discussion are all people who have judged at our state tournament and have judged later rounds of our state tournament. So they're very experienced judges, not people who've only done it one time and not really done it again. So it's people who have done it like Jamie year after year after year after year and have sat through lots and lots and lots of rounds. So she's giving you her wisdom based on literally dozens of competitions that she has sat through. So at this time, are there any questions about rules, anything like that before we watch the video? Um, I'm not seeing anybody. I think the chat's a little bit delayed on my end anyway. Um, okay, so if you think of a question while we're watching the video, please put it in the chat and we'll address it when the video is over. But otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and start it and everyone can cross their fingers and hope that it works. And then if Kevin, you can just let me know if you're actually able to hear it, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I can't hear it.
Okay, let me figure out how I make that work. Anybody know? Very quickly. Oh, oh, share computer sound. Let's try that.
May I proceed?
You may.
May it please the court, members of the jury, and Miss Hasham. Riley Truman had a secret about his family that haunted him. As an elected member of the school board, Riley was terrified that his secret would get out. So he tried to cover it up. The members of the jury today are going to learn that Riley, well, he had a problem. Mrs. Scout Cumberland. You're going to learn that Mrs. Cumberland, well, she knew Riley's secret and she kept digging it up. And on December 2nd, Mrs. Cumberland brought up Riley's secret at a school board meeting. Furious and terrified and drunk, Riley tried to stab Mrs. Cumberland. Mrs. Cumberland saw Riley step towards her and saw his hand go towards his knife, so she panicked. Mrs. Cumberland, well, she saw his knife, so she saved her life. Because Mrs. Cumberland saved her life, that's why she's arguing self-defense. Today you'll hear that Mrs. Cumberland, while she reasonably believed Riley would harm her, so she reasonably saved herself. Now, Miss Hasham got up here and told you that Mrs. Cumberland acted with the intent to kill Riley Truman. But Miss Hasham didn't bring up one very important fact that means that the prosecution will not be able to meet their burden. Riley Truman had a knife. Now, when the prosecution charges someone of a crime, they carry a burden. Today they had to prove both elements of first-degree murder beyond a reasonable doubt. The highest burden in our legal system. Now the defense, we concede the first element. Mrs. Cumberland killed Riley Truman. But the prosecution won't be able to meet their second element. And Mrs. Cumberland acted with the intent to kill Riley Truman for two reasons. First, Riley attacked first. Second, Mrs. Cumberland reasonably believed she had to save herself. Starting with the first, Riley's attack. Today you're going to hear from a member of the school board, Dr. Good. She's gonna tell you that at the December 2nd school board meeting, Mrs. Cumberland brought up Riley's secret. Immediately after, Riley grabbed Mrs. Cumberland. And you'll hear from another member of the school board, prosecution's own witness, who will tell you that they saw Riley step towards Mrs. Cumberland. They saw them lean towards Mrs. Cumberland directly before they were shot. Riley attacked first. And because of this attack, Mrs. Cumberland reasonably believed she had to save herself. Now, Mrs. Cumberland, she is going to get up in this witness stand today, and she's going to tell you she was terrified. She'd seen Riley draw his knife before and seen him do it very quickly. So when she saw Riley step towards her, saw his hand go towards his knife, she panicked. And you're going to learn that the science, well, it also aligns with Mrs. Cumberland. You're going to hear from forensic pathologist Dr. Frankie Rose. She's going to tell you that the angle of the bullet in Riley's body is consistent with Riley's left side, the side with the knife lunging towards Mrs. Cumberland. When the prosecution charges someone of a crime, they have to prove that their version of events is the only reasonable one. Members of the jury, Riley Truman had a secret. He had a knife to keep it that way. When Mrs. Cumberland saw this knife, she saw Riley step towards her.
Can you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Good evening. My name is Alex Rayburn.
And what is your profession?
I'm a detective for the Little Rock Police Department.
How long have you been with the police department?
For about 20 years now.
And can you please tell us some of your history with this department?
Well, I started off as a beat cop, worked my way up to detective, and was then promoted to lead homicide detective.
And what are your duties as lead homicide detective?
Well, I run investigations into suspicious deaths around Little Rock. That may include collecting evidence, interviewing witnesses, and analyzing ballistics and autopsy reports from our crime lab to determine if foul play was involved, and if so, who was responsible.
And did you investigate the death of Mr. Riley Truman?
I did.
How did you first become involved in that case?
On the evening of December 2nd, 2021, we received reports of a shooting during an official meeting of the Little Rock School Board. I arrived on scene at approximately 8:06 p.m. to investigate.
And what was your first step?
The EMTs on scene directed me toward the body. I identified the victim as Riley Truman.
And, Your Honor, permission to approach the witness with what has been marked as Exhibit 6.
Granted.
All right, Detective, I'm handing you a copy of Exhibit 6. Can you please identify it for the jury?
Yes, this is a short-form copy, a copy of the short-form autopsy report generated by the medical examiner's office. We work with these all the time.
And was it generated during regular police business?
It was?
And was it generated at or near the time by someone with knowledge?
Yes.
Your Honor, the prosecution now offers Exhibit 6 into evidence. Its authenticity has been stipulated.
No objection pursuant to 8036.
Received.
Would you agree that you wish you had studied that knife more?
I wish I could have studied all of the things I've worked on more.
All the things, but just this unsheathed knife specifically, you wish you'd studied that more.
That is included, yes.
And you've made a mistake with the homicide in the recent past, haven't you?
One time, yes.
And to clarify, that was 4 months before this investigation, and an investigation about a homicide with a knife, correct?
That's right.
In that investigation, you missed a key piece of evidence, right?
I did.
That evidence, it indicated self-defense, didn't it?
That evidence did indicate that.
And in that case, the charges against the suspect were dropped when that evidence was found.
That's true in that case.
And you were made aware of this mistake before the December 2nd investigation, correct?
That's true.
Now, I'd like to keep talking about your investigation. On December 2nd, you didn't make any arrests. I have that right?
I did not arrest anyone, that's correct.
Proceed.
You may.
Please state your name for the court.
My name is Charlie Goodman.
Tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, first and foremost, I'm a mom. I have 3 rowdy, immature boys, my 2 twins, and my husband. It's not easy being the only girl in the house, so I try to keep myself busy. I'm a doctor, and I also serve on the Little Rock School Board.
Tell us some more about your work.
Sure thing. I am a specialized pediatric surgeon. I work with newborn babies and those who haven't quite popped out yet. It definitely can be stressful, but it is some of the work I am the most proud of. That and my work on the Little Rock School Board.
What do you do on the school board?
I mainly help our school district on any leadership decisions. I serve with Mrs. Weston and Mrs. Cumberland.
How did you meet Mrs. Cumberland?
I first met her when we had some open seats to fill on the board. I thought she would be a great fit for Little Rock because of her education-based company, so we really wanted to try and wrangle her over here in a meeting with some potential candidates.
The school board, your reputation is important to you, isn't it?
Of course.
You need a good reputation in the community to get reelected.
I like to think I have a good reputation with the community because of all the work I do helping all the children, but yes.
Well, my question was a little bit more specific, Dr. Goodman. I didn't ask you if you think you have a good reputation. I asked you if you need a good reputation to get reelected. You do, don't
Sure.
you? Now, you supported the defendant for a position on the school board, didn't you?
Yes, my kids even drew little signs for her to carry at her campaign rallies.
Yeah, so you helped her make signs and stickers.
Yes.
You even spoke at one of her rallies.
Yep.
You loaned her $5,000.
Yes, but not to toot my own horn, I am a highly specialized surgeon in a niche field, so I could stand to loan a friend some money.
So you did loan her $5,000.
Yes.
So it's safe to say that at this point you were publicly supporting the defendant.
Yes, I thought we both had very similar ideals on how to help the children of Little Rock.
So that was a yes to my question.
Yes.
Your Honor,
Members of the jury, on December 2nd, 2021, Scout Cumberland murdered Riley Truth. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't self-defense. The truth is, it was intentional, it was purposeful, and it was exactly what the defendant wanted to happen. How do we know this is the truth? Because the defendant's words and actions, beyond any reasonable doubt, reveal it. They reveal her intentions, and they reveal the lies she's telling us in order to get away with murder. Let's look at what we know. You heard from Drew Arden that the defendant was furious with Mr. Truman after she lost her diamond, and that she promised to personally make sure that Mr. Truman got what was coming to him. And that was before she found out that Mr. Truman's grandmother had bought the diamond. We know that the defendant blames Mr. Truman for wrecking her finances, destroying their company, ruining the school board, and betraying their friendship. The defendant admitted that she chose to bring a loaded gun into a board meeting, chose to provoke Mr. Truman out of the blue, chose to follow him into a hallway and broach his family's history, chose to draw her weapon, and chose to fire twice. We know from Miss Weston that the defendant stood over Mr. Truman's body as he bled out and declared that Riley finally got what was coming to him. Good riddance. To escape these damning the truths, the defendant, much like the jeweler she learned about from Miss Weston, has claimed that the killing was justified. But how did the defense try to prove this? Well, they paid Dr. Rose $10,000 for her testimony, and all they got for that money was that Mr. Truman's left foot might have been in front of his right foot when he was shot. They called Dr. Goodman, who spent half her testimony talking about chocolate milk, because she didn't see the shooting. The defendant, Well, you got to judge the defendant's credibility for yourselves. Now, to be fair, the defendant did testify that Mr. Truman reached for his knife. But the truth is, it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter because the one lie that the defendant needs you to believe isn't that Mr. Truman reached for his knife. The lie, members of the jury, is that the defendant was afraid. Recall what Miss Weston told you, how on November 18th, Mr. Truman embarrassed the defendant in front of teachers that she'd invited to a board meeting. Well, in the parking lot afterwards, the defendant learned that she could provoke Mr. Truman into reaching for his knife by broaching his family's racist history.
May it please the court, Mr. Rahane, members of the jury. As an elected official, Riley Truman was desperate to hide his family's racist past. Mrs. Cumberland exposed him. When she brought up his secret at a public school board meeting, Riley snapped and tried to stab her. She saw his knife, so she saved her life. Because Mrs. Cumberland had to save her life, that's why she's arguing self-defense today. The evidence has shown she reasonably believed Riley would harm her, so she reasonably defended herself. Now, the prosecution is charging Mrs. Cumberland with first-degree murder. In doing so, they hold a burden. They have the burden to prove both elements of first-degree murder beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the highest burden in our legal system. We don't dispute the first element. Mrs. Cumberland killed Riley Truman, but the state has failed to prove the second, that she acted with intention to cause his death. They failed because of two simple facts. One, Riley attacked first, and two, Mrs. Cumberland reasonably believed she had to save herself. Let's start with that attack. When Mrs. Cumberland brought up his darkest secret in public, Riley
Okay, sorry, I forgot that it ended abruptly like that. I wasn't ready for the end. Okay, are there any questions from anybody before we move on to our breakouts? Anybody? And you can also ask your questions in the breakout rooms. That's also fine. Everyone here is experienced and should know the answer to whatever questions you might have about the rules. And if for some reason they don't, they can come grab me and we can get you an answer before it finishes. And then if you think of any questions after we leave here that are not answered by the rules, I would first start with having your coach email your regional coordinators, and then if you can't get an answer, then they can get with Melissa as our state coordinator to try to get some clarification for you guys. This time I'm going to go ahead and first of all, I'm going to stop to close that. And then I'm going to stop the recording.